For all the ruin Sauron inflicted upon Middle-earth, his presence during the Lord of the Rings remained peculiarly spectral, more felt than seen. Yet, make no mistake, he was far from idle. Contrary to his portrayal in the Peter Jackson movies, where he is reimagined as a disembodied burning eye suspended above the Black Tower of Barad-dûr, Sauron had in truth taken physical form once more by the time of the events of the Lord of the Rings. In fact, by the time he returned to Mordor in the year 2951 of the Third Age, he had been incarnate under the guise of the Necromancer for nearly 2,000 years, and now that he had returned to the Black Tower of Barad-dûr, Sauron reclaimed an ancient tool that allowed his influence to reach forth into the world. A Palantir, one of the seeing stones of old. Denethor II, steward of Gondor, also held a Palantir, the Anor stone, which had long been kept safe and unused within the citadel of Minas Tirith. Around the year 2987, in sorrow following the death of his beloved wife, Denethor turned to the stone, seeking wisdom and foreknowledge to shield his people from the rising tide of darkness. The Anor stone, however, was bound to Sauron's Ithil stone, and upon sensing Denethor's presence, Sauron sought to bend the Palantir of Minas Tirith to his will. But Denethor resisted him, for the steward was of proud and noble lineage. This gave him both the fortitude of spirit to resist Sauron and a birthright to the stone, which Sauron found it impossible to overcome. Yet even in failure, Sauron triumphed. For Denethor's mind and body bore the weight of his silent battle of wills with the Dark Lord. He began to appear old before his time, and as the flame of his hope began to gutter, despair gripped the heart of Gondor's ruler. Thus did Sauron strike his first blow without raising sword nor spear. In this way, Denethor gained his great knowledge of things that passed in his realm and far beyond his borders, at which men marveled. But he bought the knowledge dearly, being aged before his time by his contest with the will of Sauron. Thus pride increased in Denethor together with despair, until he saw in all the deeds of that time only a single combat between the Lord of the White Tower and the Lord of the Barad-dûr, and mistrusted all others who resisted Sauron unless they served himself alone. 13 years after Denethor first dared to use the Palantir, Saruman the White, ever curious and hungry for knowledge, also chose to gaze into the depths of his seeing stone. From that moment onward, the shadow of Sauron was able to silently infiltrate the ancient fortress of Orthanc, and a dark thread was spun between the Black Lord of Mordor and the White Wizard of Isengard. Sauron now began to influence Saruman's mind, twisting his thoughts with insidious whispers. Sauron's manipulation has led many to believe that it was he who first corrupted the White Wizard. The truth is that Sauron merely shaped the treachery that was already brooding within him. Still, Sauron seized the opportunity. Through menace and manipulation, he began to break Saruman's will, forging a union born not of true loyalty, but of fear, pride, and the hope of shared dominion. But the Dark Lord's influence outside the Black Land was not limited to only those who chose to use the Palantiri. For in those same darkening days, Sauron's shadow was felt far and wide, as he cast an unseen net across Middle-earth. All wicked things felt his pull, even Gollum was drawn to it, dragged, as if by invisible chains, toward the source of a power too great to resist. "Yes to Mordor," said Gandalf. Alas, Mordor draws all wicked things, and the dark power was bending all its will to gather them there. The ring of the enemy would leave its mark too, leave Gollum open to the summons, and all folk were whispering then of the new shadow in the south, and its hatred of the west. There were his fine new friends, who would help him in his revenge. At some point between the years 3009 and 3017 of the Third Age, drawn by Sauron's call, Gollum crept into the land of Mordor. There he was seized by the servants of Sauron. He was bound, beaten, and questioned under torment. And from Gollum, Sauron learned of hobbits and of a land which he had not heard of before, called the Shire. After learning what he could of the ring from Gollum, Sauron made a choice that would alter the fate of Middle-earth forever. He set Gollum free, but Gollum was almost immediately captured once again. In the year 3117, Aragorn, after a long hunt, finally overtook Gollum in the Dead Marshes. From there, he led Gollum north and delivered him into the care of the elves of Mirkwood. Upon learning of Gollum's capture, Sauron became greatly concerned that he might reveal information to the elves that would lead them to discover the location of the ring. Consequently, on the 20th of June in the year 3018, Sauron was forced to take action. He unleashed his forces upon Osgiliath in a battle that marked the beginning of the War of the Ring. He simultaneously sent a host of orcs to attack the woodland realm, with the purpose of freeing Gollum from his imprisonment. Legolas implies, at the Council of Elrond, that Sauron had somehow sent word to Gollum, informing him of the hour in which the assault would come. In the days of fair weather, we led Gollum through the woods, and there was a high tree standing alone far from the others which he liked to climb. Often we let him mount up to the highest branches until he felt a free wind, but we set a guard at the tree's foot. It was that very night of summer, yet moonless and starless, that the orcs came on us at unawares. We drove them off after some time. They were many and fierce, but they came from over the mountains and were unused to the woods. When the battle was over, we found that Gollum was gone, and his guards were slain or taken. It then seemed plain to us that the attack had been made for his rescue, and that he knew of it beforehand, though the twin assaults achieved their immediate aims of liberating Gollum and testing the strength of Gondor. This was not their true purpose, for these attacks veiled Sauron's secret intent. They were orchestrated to mask the true reason that the Nazgûl were being sent forth from Mordor. For the Nine did not ride forth as generals, leading hosts to war, but as ringwraiths driven by a single objective: to locate and retrieve the One Ring. Through his cunning diversions, Sauron cloaked the passage of the Nine as they crossed Anduin. By the month of September in 3018, the Nazgûl had spent around 3 months scouring the wilds in vain. The Shire eluded them, and with each passing day, Sauron's fury grew. When the wraiths returned to the Wold, they were met by messengers out of Mordor, and they bore threats so dire they chilled even the Witch King's icy heart. The messengers brought new orders from Sauron, which spoke of his growing sense of desperation. He commanded them to abandon secrecy entirely and to ride for Isengard with haste. There, they were to confront the White Wizard and wrest from him any knowledge he might possess regarding the ring. But Saruman revealed nothing, hoping to forestall the wraiths long enough to claim the ring for himself. Nonetheless, the Nazgûl did eventually manage to locate the Shire and track the ring-bearer, hunting him relentlessly until the hour in which they were thwarted at the ford of Bruinen. Their failure was laid bare when the Witch King alone rode back to his master in the final days of December. Sauron's plan to retrieve the ring had failed. Yet where Sauron had failed, Saruman still hoped to succeed. And so, on the 25th of February, he began his war upon Rohan. It is a common misconception that Isengard's war upon Rohan was done at Sauron's bidding. In truth, Saruman's treacherous thoughts had taken root in his mind long ago. For nearly 70 years, he had harbored dark designs for the land of Rohan, and his assault would have come regardless of Sauron's will. For the White Wizard sought power to rival Sauron, a white hand reaching for a black crown. Certainly after the last White Council 2953, his designs towards Rohan, though he hid them, were evil. He then took Isengard for his own, and began to make it a place of guarded strength and fear, as though to rival the Barad-dûr. His friends and servants he drew then from all who hated Gondor and Rohan. Were the men or other creatures more evil? Yet Saruman's war was to be short-lived. For the Ents descended upon Isengard and imprisoned the White Wizard in his tower, and Saruman's precious Palantir was claimed by Gandalf. And on the 5th day of March, Pippin peered into it, and to his great dismay, the Dark Lord stared back. Sauron, still unaware of Saruman's downfall, mistook what he saw. He believed the halfling which he beheld was the ring-bearer himself, ensnared and imprisoned by Saruman. He imagined that the hobbit had been compelled to gaze into the seeing stone for his captor's twisted amusement. And so, in a moment of arrogance and cruelty, Sauron did not press the hobbit for answers. Instead, he commanded Pippin to deliver a message to his captor. "Wait a moment, we shall meet again soon. He shall tell Saruman that this dainty is not for him. I will send for it at once. Do you understand?" Say just that. But Sauron's mirth was to be fleeting, for only a matter of hours later, a new vision appeared in the Palantir. Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, now stared back at him from out of the stone's depths, and he bore Anduril, the sword reforged from the shards of Narsil. As Aragorn had planned, the sight tore at Sauron's festering doubts and old fears. And the Dark Lord believed now that perhaps the White Wizard had been overthrown, and that Aragorn had seized the halfling, and with him the ring. Sauron has not forgotten Isildur and the sword of Elendil. Now, in the very hour of his great designs, the heir of Isildur and the sword are revealed. For I showed the blade reforged to him. He is not so mighty yet that he is above fear. Nay, doubt ever gnaws him. This sudden turn of events struck fear through Sauron's black heart. In desperation, he commanded the Witch King to begin the assault on Gondor ahead of schedule, abandoning the calculating patience for which Sauron was renowned. It was a bold and reckless wager. He rushed to destroy his enemies before they could use the power of the ring against him. Sauron also issued orders for the forces garrisoned at Dol Guldur to strike at the elves' men and dwarves of the north. And so both Lothlorien and the Woodland Realm came under attack. Further east, Sauron also sent forth vast legions of Easterlings to assault the men of Dale and the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain. Ultimately, the warriors of Lothlorien were able to successfully defend their borders. Thranduil's elves fought long and bitterly in the battle under the trees, but they too emerged victorious. However, in Dale, a hard battle was fought for 3 days and nights. Both sides suffered grievous losses, but the defenders were eventually driven back, retreating into the halls of Erebor. Further to the south, a contingent of orcs also passed south over Anduin and into Rohan. They planned to attack whilst the bulk of Rohan's strength was committed to the defense of Minas Tirith. However, they met there with an unexpected foe. The Ents of Fangorn would not stand idly by and allow these foul creatures to ravage the Riddermark unchecked. Thus, ancient and wrathful, they arose once more from the forest and crushed the invaders upon the wold of Rohan. And in the south, the Dark Lord's plans unraveled further still. Sauron had instructed the Corsairs to attack the southern fiefs of Gondor. Their mission was clear, to prevent reinforcements from reaching Minas Tirith. There is a great fleet drawing near to the mouths of Anduin, manned by the Corsairs of Umbar in the south. They have long ceased to fear the might of Gondor, and they have allied them with the enemy, and now make a heavy stroke in his cause. For this attack will draw off much of the help that we look to have come from Lebanon and Belfalis, where folk are hardy and numerous. Yet even this attack did not unfold as Sauron had hoped. Unbeknownst to Sauron, Aragorn had recruited and led the army of the dead to confront the Corsairs. This ghastly host struck terror into the hearts of their foe, driving them from their black ships. Then, seizing the abandoned fleet, Aragorn sailed north up the great river, bringing desperately needed reinforcements to the defense of Minas Tirith. The Battle of the Pelennor Fields was a bitter defeat for Sauron. His mightiest and most trusted servant, the Witch King of Angmar, was vanquished, and a sizable portion of his army was lost. But for all this, Sauron was far from defeated. He still held a vast and terrible host in reserve in Mordor. Yet the host of the West would march upon the Black Gate regardless, to keep his eye transfixed and blind to all else that moved. It was then, as Aragorn and Gandalf led this force of 7,000 men toward the Black Gate, that Sauron made a fatal error. On the 17th of March, 8 days before the ring would be destroyed, Shagrath arrived at Barad-dûr, bearing Frodo's elven cloak, mithril shirt and sword. He informed Sauron of the presence of a powerful intruder who he believed to be an elf lord. Yet Sauron dismissed the news, consumed by his belief that the ring was being carried ever closer now by the approaching host of the West. And thus, Frodo and Sam pressed on, unseen and unchallenged. Sauron did not perceive of his folly until the very moment when Frodo finally claimed the ring for his own. In that moment, Sauron finally saw the truth. He had been deceived. He abandoned all thought of the armies locked in combat before the Black Gate. His gaze turned instead to Mount Doom as his winged wraiths shrieked across the skies. But he was too late. Gollum seized the ring and fell into the fiery chasm. At that moment, the power of Sauron was undone. The earth heaved and shook, stone was split and mighty towers fell. And in that final unraveling, it was revealed that Sauron was much more than a mere commander of his armies. For it became clear that he had been utilizing some dark sorcery to control the minds of his warriors. And when his power was broken, so too was the unseen force that held his legions together. The captains bowed their heads, and when they looked up again, behold, their enemies were flying, and the power of Mordor was scattering like dust in the wind. As when death smites the swollen, brooding thing that inhabits their crawling hill and holds them all in sway, ants will wander, witless and purposeless, and then feebly die. So the creatures of Sauron, orc or troll or beast, spell-enslaved, ran hither and thither mindless, and some slew themselves, or cast themselves in pits, or fled wailing back to hide in holes and dark, lightless places, far from hope. As we can see, Sauron's actions moved like a hidden tide through the story of the Lord of the Rings, shaping the world in a whole host of unseen ways. Through the dark glass of the Palantir, through alliances forged, through carefully calculated strategies, through the sheer force of his will, he waged a war that engulfed Middle-earth. It is a stroke of narrative brilliance from Tolkien that Sauron, the most iconic villain in the fantasy genre, was not a great warlord, but a shadowy presence hidden within the dark tower of Barad-dûr. Sauron is omnipresent and untouchable, his will exerted through armies, sorcery, and manipulation. Thus, Sauron is elevated from a mere antagonist to a metaphysical threat, a symbol of fear and dominion, the very embodiment of evil. Thank you very much for tuning in to Realms Unraveled. I would like to take this opportunity to light the beacons and call for aid. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you would click the like button below and consider subscribing to the channel. And until next time, farewell, fellow explorers of Middle-earth.